Hey everybody, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest. And throughout the rest of this year, every single week, we're going to be featuring our top projects of the year. And today I have with me Bruce Hall, Principal Landscape Architecture for SM&E. I also have Jay Hood, who's the Director of Landscape Architecture for SM&E. And we have three others from Se7en Wetlands and the City of Lakeland. We have Bill Anderson, he's the Director of Water Utilities for the City of Lakeland. Pam Page, she's the Deputy Director of Parks and Recreation, which was coordinating part of this effort, and Sarah Malone, Manager of Se7en Wetlands. So with all of you guys' names and titles and everything out of the way, I wanted to throw it first off to Sarah to talk a little bit about the background of this project. Could you talk about the history of these wastewater wetlands?
Sure, and to go even further back before the wastewater wetlands were in existence, the history of the property itself is really interesting, and I think it's part of what makes this place so unique. So phosphate mining happened on this property dating back to as early as the mid-1920s. That went on for several decades up until at least the 40s, and then the leftover remains, the phosphate pits, at that time were turned into clay settling areas. And that's just part of the process of beneficiation of the mined phosphate into fertilizer. They circulate the matrix through these pits to separate the clays and the sands and the phosphate minerals. So that went on for several years. Sometime around the mid-1980s, all mining operations on the property ceased. And that was about the same time, around 1985, that the City of Lakeland was looking for an alternative location to discharge our treated wastewater. So we found this property, purchased it, and over the next couple of years converted those clay settling areas into constructed treatment wetlands. That process, the site actually looks much like today than it did when it was clay settling areas. We made some changes to the berm slopes, added some water control structures, and planted a lot of wetland vegetation. And by 1987, the city was sending all of its treated wastewater to this site for final polishing prior to discharging downstream to the Alafaya River and eventually Tampa Bay. So we operated for more than 30 years as a constructed treatment wetland before we started discussing the possibility of opening this property up to the public as a park for Se7en Wetlands. And through those 30 years, we had a couple other important milestones. In the mid-90s, we were designated one of the top most important wading bird rookeries in Florida. And I want to say it was around 2015, we began sending our treated wastewater, at least a portion of it, to the Tampa Electric Company's Polk Power Station for beneficial reuse there in their cooling towers. And then in 2018, that's when we opened a portion of the property to the public as Se7en Wetlands.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's like one of the critical pieces of this whole project, right? Is this opening it to the public. What was the primary motivator behind that? Why did you guys want to make this a public space that people could visit?
So Bob, I'll start. Really the timing, and Sarah touched on a couple of the things here, the timing of many different pieces coming together really gave us the story to tell of what Se7en Wetlands does, how it treats the water, where the water goes. So as you probably are well aware, in the water utility industry, communication with the public is becoming more and more important, and we want that open communication with the public and to be able to tell our story. So with that evolution and this partnership that we developed with TECO to send a portion of that water for beneficial reuse, that's another very important story that we wanted to tell. Water conservation, as that is becoming more and more critical, especially here in Central Florida, that was the other piece that, as that's becoming more and more prevalent, another story to tell. the uniqueness, Sarah touched on it already, the uniqueness of this property, the history of the property, the beneficial reclamation of that property from the mining industry to a treatment wetland. And then working with Pam, and from a Parks and Rec perspective, the demand, if you will, for open space, for green space, for passive recreation here in the Lakeland area. All these things converged at once within a several year time period. What a great story to tell. And so that was kind of really the driving force, that all these things came together. We need to tell the story of this property, of the cycle of water. What better opportunity to do it than with this facility?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really cool way to do it and like get them on site. I think that a lot of
Yes.
facilities are looking to do that more and more of like having tours available and doing them more regularly. Really tell the public like this is why we're important.
Well, and this is really, it's a beautiful site too. I mean, 1,600 acres of open water lakes, marshes, swamps. The wildlife viewing out there is just incredible. You know, everything from our American alligator that have homes out there to, as Sarah mentioned, important wading bird rookeries that are out there. Just all these things, the amenities that we up until this point were not available to the public. So why not? Let's tell our story. Let's make this property accessible to the public. Let them see what we've seen for years.
Yeah. And you touched on a little bit some of the features that are there and just kind of the things that you can do. Could you elaborate a little bit on like what types of considerations did you make in terms of features to make sure that the public would be interested in coming to see?
Anybody?
Um, yeah, go ahead, Pam.
I think that from the Parks and Rec point of view, we had our biggest hurdle that we had to overcome was the accessibility of this acreage, because this acreage is located outside of the city limits, so that you had to go out into the county to get into the facility, which was great when we were keeping all the gates locked and closed for security as a wastewater resource. But for us to be able to open it up to the public, we had to establish relationships with the county so that we could access through 3 different parks that the county had established entrances into this facility, which were very close to Lakeland city limits. So we had to establish, well, we already had for years had a great working relationship with the County Parks and Recreation Department, but we brought them on board from the very beginning, and were able to establish 3 good entrances into this facility. But most importantly, by establishing those entrances, we have contiguous public property available to citizens and visitors that's over 2,800 acres that are all contiguous. So this became a regional park.
Mhm.
And it was so advantageous for the county that we established a maintenance agreement with the county that when we built the restrooms at 2 of the entrances that were adjacent to their facilities and they needed restrooms there, we were able to come up with an agreement where they would maintain them for us in exchange for access through the wetlands to 3 other county parks. And so it was a huge maintenance plus, not only for the city of Lakeland, but for Polk County.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, yeah, and touching a little bit more on this relationship that the Parks and Rec had with the wastewater side of the city of Lakeland, what was that partnership like? Like, how had you worked together before? And like, yeah, just talk a little bit about like what that was like. I'm sure that there were a lot of conversations about like what, why, and all of that. So.
Well, I mean, I have to tell this story. I was in my office, and Bob, who is he was the director of water utility, and Bill just made an appointment to come over, and they walked in the office with this great big huge aerial map and said, "We have a new park for you." And I was like,
Her
"Oh,
eyes.
okay." But then once they told me it was 1,640 acres with 400 acres of upland, it solved all of our level of service needs for our master plan, long-term master plan. So we just jumped all over it and said, this is unbelievable that we're gonna be able to open up eventually 22 miles of trails on this gorgeous piece of property. You know, and so we had to make it a park. We had to make it, where people wanted to come out and see it. So we planned boardwalks, restrooms, drinking fountains, picnic sheds. I'll let Bruce and Jay talk about the master planning process, because that's very much a part of all of the stakeholders that we had to bring together to make this happen.
Well, and I'll just follow up on kind of touching on what Pam just talked about, key features or program elements, and also the previous question. But I think what's interesting and what you're bringing to the public from a feature standpoint is telling the story to the public in an entertaining and educational manner. And the storyline all starts where the treated water enters into the wetlands. And it's just really exciting to see this tremendous amount of volume of water flow in. The mist is in the air. It's cooling you down a little bit almost as you're at the observation boardwalks. But as you progress through, there's, we have master plan and observation platform that's accessible on top of a 60-foot levee and see out across the entire property and on to the distance, and also created a tower that would be freestanding connected to it. In both cases, then you would see actual flag pennants at each of the 7 wetlands, so that one could look at a small map in the kiosk there and see where they're all located, understand the effluent process. And it was kind of an opportunity to dream, because we looked at doing floating solar arrays in one of the basins. Sarah touched on the rookery. So we have an observation platform the outdoor classroom, the indoor and outdoor classroom. There's just a lot of venues, and they're all spread out some distance to get from one to another. But as Pam said, there's miles and miles of pathway across the tops of the berms alone.
Well, and I guess one of the themes of the success of 7 Wetlands, it really is collaboration and partnership. So, Pam had her story of when Bill came over to talk to her, Bill and Bob. So we got the call from Pam and said, hey, we're going to work on a master plan for a 1,600 acre water treatment area, and it was like, what is that going to be? But it was really great, because we probably had 15 people who showed up for an on-site charrette. They had actually a really nice facility where there's displays where kids could come in and get educated. And as Bill and Bob kind of unfolded that story to us, it was like, holy cow, this is great. And there were folks from the county there. They didn't know that story either. And so it really was. We all took off, ran out there. We saw tons of gators, tons of birds. And it was just like, my gosh, this is a tremendous asset, that this is a big deal to get people in here, because, for years, it's just a secret property that nobody knows about. It's behind fences, and it's this big mystery. And I'll tell you what, it's just from the moment that I think as that entire group took the tour of the property, We work collaboratively to understand like where are the highlight areas, where are the places that we've got to get to, and that just informed the master plan. But it gets back to that mission of education and storytelling, again, because it's like, hey, people turn on their faucet and they flush their toilet, and all works and all's great. Well, this is actually part of that. And as much as we can educate on the natural environment, plus on the, what does the city provide? What do utilities and water, the services that they provide, it actually just kind of opens everybody's minds, I think. So.
And part of telling that story is not just what happens here in the city of Lakeland, but it is truly a regional process, because once that water leaves us, it goes to TECO, and or it goes downstream, as Sarah mentioned, in the Alafia River, which leads over into Tampa Bay, which is 40 miles west of here. And with the Tampa Bay Estuary program and what they're doing over there, we're all part of this. So just a huge regional story to tell. And the previous ties, Mosaic as well, they've been a great partner with us on Se7en Wetlands because of the phosphate history of that property as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to touch on. There were some challenges with the local soils for this as well. Could you talk a little bit about how you guys overcame some of the challenges surrounding that?
Sure. I think part of what we did was we were flexible. The master plan may have called for a boardwalk. Go ahead, Pam. I think she's freezing again. Part of the master plan called for a boardwalk to be in a certain area. And
Sarah, go ahead.
As we explored that area with some heavy equipment, we ran into some problems with the soils because of the previous mining that had occurred on site. And so we were flexible and adaptable, and eventually moved that boardwalk to a more appropriate location. Actually, we ended up getting 2 boardwalks out of it rather than just 1, so it ended up being a bonus. So I think being a little bit flexible, and we also learned our lesson that we do need to do as we're looking to build future buildings. We have an educational center that we're currently designing right now. We need to do soil borings and full geotech reports, and use pilings where required. So those were some of the challenges.
Yeah, Pam, did you want to touch on some of the challenges around the soils as well?
Yeah, I think Sarah covered them.
Okay. Yeah, you also had talked a little bit in the nomination form about safety measures for the public and making sure that people were safe regardless of where they were throughout this giant landmass, basically. Could you talk a little bit about what thoughts and concerns you guys had and how you managed to put those safety measures into place?
I think our greatest concern is we were going to lose folks out there. And you don't want to be out there at night because the mosquitoes are the size of birds. So one of the most important things that SM&E was able to help us with was to put together a guidance system of markers that we registered with the Polk County Sheriff's Office, so that anybody who's anywhere out there, there's a code on the top, and you can either use your phone to take, for the QR codes, or you can call the sheriff's office, and the sheriff, each one of those posts is logged into Esri map with the sheriff's office, so that they can pinpoint you and find you if there was an emergency of some sort or you were lost. Do you want to talk about the berms, Bill?
So sure, as we talked about earlier, this is reclaimed phosphate property with some very high and steep berms. And one of the concerns, in Central Florida, there are many mountain bikers out here and trails all over, and that was one of the I think early on requests was, is this facility going to be opened up to cycling. And quite frankly, we had to say no to that because of the height and steepness of the berms. Obviously, personnel safety, we don't want somebody, you know, going down those berms and flipping, but equally important is the integrity of those berms. They're all very heavily vegetated, grasses to hold those berms in place. And really the last thing we want is any trails to form in those berms, which would lead to erosion, which could lead to berm failure. So unfortunately, we had to say no to cyclists at this facility.
Yeah,
We
I
also
can understand.
installed security cameras at the gates so we can track people coming and going. Our gates have automatic locks, so they do lock after hours to try and keep people out from being out there at night. And we've also enlisted volunteers who have been a great help patrolling the property while my staff is not on site, so especially on weekends. So we have volunteers that go out there and patrol and talk to people and make sure people aren't getting lost and following the rules. So that's been a big help to keep both the property safe and secure and the people that are visiting safe.
Yeah, there's also the gators. You know, you have to talk about gators if you're going to talk about safety. So there are times of the year and areas where it's probably best to not get people and gators together. So there are some times that for everybody's safety, areas are closed off. So. But Sarah, you know, Sarah touched on the technology, but that's another piece of it. You know, a lot of that is solar powered. You know, we're trying to keep things as sustainable as possible, but also not have to run power to it. But then there's also really cool apps that have been developed to help people self-guide. You know, so I don't know, Sarah, if you want to touch on any of that.
Yeah, we have a map app that we created that actually tracks your location through the park, and it has all the numbers for the trail markers on there so that if you do get lost, you can always find your way back with our map app. We actually don't have maps at this time, so it's either take a picture of our trail entrance or download the map app, and so far that's worked out really well. We have another app, and it's not actually ours, it's called iNaturalist. To help document animal species on site. So that's open to the public. It'll help you identify what you're looking at and log it so that we can keep track of that and collect data from the public.
Another item on the safety is the pavilions that through the first 2 phases, we've started locating pavilions at certain areas where people can either picnic, take a break, or get out of the sun. But more importantly, when the storms start to roll in very quickly, if you're in a remote location, there's an opportunity to go ahead and get out of the weather, stay dry, but also stay out of the lightning at those points. So, and wait out the storm.
It's also a great place to social distance while we're talking about safety. So.
That is true.
Yeah. Well, it's been great to have you guys all on. Sarah, you broke up a little bit when you're talking about the iNaturalist app. Could you mention that just quickly before we let you go?
Sure. We encourage the public to use an app called iNaturalist while they're out on site. It helps document the plant and animal species that we have on site, and it also uses crowdsourcing to help you identify what you're looking at. So that's been a really successful application that we encourage the public to use while they're visiting.
Sweet. Well, thank you guys all so much for being on the call. It's been great to talk to you about this project, and I'm hoping that other people can take some time to finally go down there and see it. And like you said, social distance.
Well, give me a call anytime you want to visit. We'll give you a tour.
That sounds great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you so much, Bob.